In personal experience, one of the most frustrating things for postdocs is coming into an institution and nobody knows who you are. So the basic things that you can get as a graduate student, all of a sudden you lose. I know at Western, we had issues with getting library services, for example. And so the little thing that changed that made a huge difference is that they made an ID designation for postdocs. It says, you're a postdoc. And we were given all the same library privileges as new faculty, I think. But, and then we're given parking privileges, and we're given, these things seem so small, but in comparison, when you go into a university and you go to get a parking pass and they go, what's a postdoc? Like, you're not a student, I can't give you a student rate. You're not a faculty, I can't give you a staff rate. You're not staff. Like, that little thing, and I know institutions that have changed their name of their grad studies to graduate studies and postdoctoral studies, where postdocs have a home where they can go and say, I'm a postdoc and this is my issue, and somebody actually says, oh, okay, we either know what to do or we know how to deal with it. That makes a huge difference. The people who are in those institutions, assuming that their mentor relationship is sound, are much happier. One of the things that we'd like to institute in Canada is this thing called an individual development plan, which is like an academic document that says you sit down with your mentor at the beginning. Because you don't have supervisory committees or any of the structure around graduate studies, there's nothing. It becomes an amorphous situation. What we'd like to see is a document saying, okay, you're my mentor, I'm your postdoc. This is our expectations. You expect me to publish so many papers, you expect me to work so many hours a week, I expect to attend this many conferences, I expect to do this, and then there's this meeting of the minds. So it's set out right from the beginning. And then it's followed over time. Because so many times when these relationships go sour, it's because of different expectations. And if that's never clarified, it's never realized. We found the studies in the States of institutions that have IDPs, they increase postdoctoral satisfaction almost to the same level as if they got a $20,000 pay increase. Like that's how much it's satisfying to those postdocs. Just that formalization, that this is my expectations, these are my requirements. So we would love to do that. The problem is the whole carrot and the stick thing. How are we going to convince mentors to do that? But that's where we'd like to move. Just some basic rules of gameplay that we think would make a huge difference. It's funny, I sat on a career panel at my current institution, and I was sitting there with somebody who just got in a faculty position, somebody who's near retirement, and then someone who's sort of midway. And I was basically told I was being too pessimistic, that it's not as bad as you say. And I'm like, I'm the one looking, I'm the one that's applying, and the guy next to me who had just gotten a position, I'm like, yeah, that's great, but you're the 1 in 5, and and I still heard from that panel, well, we expect some retirements in the next couple of years, and I just I'm surprised my head doesn't explode, because there's not. And I'd love to have the statistics on how many professors actually retire and then are being not lost to attrition. How many actually retire and that position is then posted for someone new? I think there are some opportunities, but I honestly think that sometimes we get this optimistic path that is sugar-coated, that this is the right, and I think it has to do with not being able to give you that alternative. I think sometimes they're like, you've invested in 13 years now, it has to be in this way, because if not, then that kind of candy-coated Sugarland world falls apart. And what we'd like to say is, why don't we do that at the PhD? Why not? Let's be realistic at the PhD, not at 4 years post-PhD. Unfortunately, it has to go way back. And I'm sure mentors can identify who they think will be good faculty members at that level. There's a certain amount of culture that has to change. This idea that, the indentured servants sort of idea that, come on. We have a PhD. There has to be a certain amount of ownership, I think, among postdocs to say, yes, I know I'm here to work my hardest, but I will work my hardest if I know where I'm going. if we both buy into the same project and we both buy into the same idea, I will work day and night. But just working day and night with no real goal, I think it's losing sight of the idea. It's losing sight of what you want. Because postdocs, ideally, by the time you're a postdoc, you should be working independently. It shouldn't require someone standing in the corner telling you you need to be there 60 hours a week. I mean, there's a reason that 43% of science papers are first authored by postdocs. It's because we're already at that stage. Like, we're already at our highly productive. We don't need someone telling us, but we just want to be guided. So honestly, I think what needs to happen is that a couple of universities need to do it, and then they attract more postdocs, they attract more funding, and then we'd like to see it tied into funding, actually, because they have to prove, in many grants, you have to prove the training for graduate students. Why shouldn't there be an analogous to postdocs? And boy, maybe it's a copy of that sheet, that IDP. It doesn't have to be long and drawn out. It should take, 20 minutes to say, this is my expectations, this is your expectations, and you should know right up front if they don't match.
Is there resistance to developing a policy for postdocs?
I don't think there's resistance. I just think traditionally it's been amorphous and there's just been resistance to change. I think that universities that have developed policy around postdocs have done very good policy around postdocs, have been very fair and very, the universities that I've worked with on policy development have been amazing. I think once a university recognizes something like, let me give you an example. I was at a university where they would like to call their postdocs independent contractors for issues of status. And I said to them, well, that's great, but if they're an independent contractor and they develop something that's intellectual property, does that mean it's theirs? And all of a sudden, the institution went, wait a second, we have no policy around intellectual property from postdocs. And these are the people, you're highly trained who are working on those projects, who work on these, side-by-side industry projects, and all of a sudden, it's not clear who owns what. And let me tell you, that institution got policy pretty quick. I think sometimes, because postdocs are so tied to their mentor for career progression, that those things don't happen. You don't stab your mentor in the back. But you could see where there could be abuses of that system. I know there's one of the members, the president of the University of Ottawa postdoc association. He did a PhD in engineering. So he came out of his engineering degree. He had job offers thrown at him. Nortel was at its height. So people were like, oh, no, don't go into engineering. Go get a PhD. You go work for Nortel. And then during the time he was getting his PhD, Nortel collapsed. So that there's a shifting slope, and people need to realize that academia isn't this ivory tower that there's always going to be rooms in. I think, and I don't think we have to do it discipline by discipline, but we should make postdocs, PhDs aware, saying the job market today isn't the job market in 5 years' time. And it might be better, it might be worse. So people just need to be prepared. I don't think we tell people don't to do a PhD, but what I tell people is be clear on what you're going to do with that PhD and what your plan B is and what your plan C is. And I think just having an engaged postdoc population makes that clear. When your postdoc population is engaged, they're not hiding. They're not shuffled away. The more visible they are, the more graduate students will learn from that. They don't have to sit in a room and tell them. You just know. I can tell you from personal experience that sometimes I've sent my CV out and they've looked at it and they're like, oh, well, obviously you're set to go into academia. I'm like, no. They haven't hired me. So sometimes it's this overqualified myth or this, you know what I mean? Especially once you have 5 or 6 years post-PhD work. I find sometimes it's easier to make that leap right post-PhD than it is sometimes after postdoctoral experience, because then you become so pigeonholed. But I think it then depends on the people, and it depends on you. I mean, you should be able, so much of getting a job is selling yourself, right? Is selling yourself in that position. And so it's the wealth of your experience. I think sometimes postdocs tend to focus only on their academic experience, where they have a breadth of other experiences that are just as important.